Yes, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Betsy. My name is Danielle Kennewaig, and I go by Danny, and I'm the manager of the Health Promotion Practice and Policy section at the Washington State Department of Health in the Prevention and Community Health Division. A while back, as we were organizing topics for this year, the webinars for this year, we essentially agreed as a planning group that there's still a lot of question in our public health work world around policy systems and environmental change. What is it? And so that is our topic for the day. With that as our topic for the day, we have two presenters who will be sharing with us their work and their perception and around PES, or Policy, Environmental, and Systems Change. The first person we will hear from today is Carla Hike. And Carla is the manager of the Healthy Communities program here at the Washington State Department of Health. And she'll be sharing some sort of contextual pieces around policy, environmental, and systems change and what we are doing at the Department of Health to get this work done. Carla will be doing her presentation, and then we will hear from Lita Travis, who I'll introduce when Carla's finished. And after that, we'll take any questions that you may have as listeners. So with that, Carla, take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for spending some time at the lunch hour to hear about at least what we're thinking about policy systems and environmental changes here at the department. Sometimes I will use the term PSE in terms of what that is, and we're going to go ahead and start and really talk about policy. So next slide, please. Okay, so you'll see the slide when it happens. What I really wanted to start with is when we use these terms, sometimes they're even referred to as buzzwords of what is policy, environment, systems, and as I was preparing for this webinar, the piece that was really clear is that there's lots of different ways to interpret it, and there's lots of ways to try and frame the issue. From the work that we're trying to do around chronic disease prevention through our Healthy Communities program, is that we're really looking at trying to make sustainable change. And the reason is we all know that the budgets are shrinking, our staff resources are shrinking, and that we want to make a difference in the lives of the residents in our state. One of the strongest ways to do that is through policy change. And when we refer to policies, we're really talking about sometimes the big P policy, you may hear that term, whether that's a law or an ordinance. Sometimes it's a resolution from a city council, a county council. It can also be mandates or things that are passed by the voters even. We have a strong initiative piece here in Washington, so those often will define our policies, and then the regulations and rules. One of the things that I think is really important when we talk about policy is it's not necessarily something that just happens overnight. Policy change takes a long time, as I'm sure many of you who have been doing this work really would articulate that as well. What we see is that policy change takes partnerships. It's not something that any of us in public health can say, I want to make a change. Let's go change this policy and let's pass it. What we see is when policies are passed without any support, it gets really difficult to implement them. So although policies can be a very strong way to advocate for public health change, it is important to have that groundswell of support, and that's happening through partnerships. And when Lita talks, she'll really talk about what that looks like at the local level. From my perspective, I think partnership is probably one of the key things to make policy change happen. Other places that we see policy change happen, and I think more traditionally we've seen it in like the legislative session, that the lawmakers will change a policy. But the really exciting piece is that we're starting to see change happen with the help of our local health partners throughout the state. Another place that sometimes you will see a policy change would be from a business. They may pass a policy around that they will only hire people who don't use tobacco, or that they the policy is that folks have access to healthy foods. And that's not just something that employees or staff want, it's something that's written down. I think policy, one of the biggest pieces is that it's something that is written down, formally adopted, and that it has created a sustainable change. Betsy, is it possible to put the slide on that I'm talking through?
Carla, we're having some technical difficulty right now. I'm trying to get some help so we can figure out what's going on. For some reason, I'm changing the slides, but they're not changing in the presentation. So my apologies for that.
So at some point, folks who are on the call, you'll get to see this, but I kind of talked through it. Like most of us in public health, we learn how to wing it. So I'm going to just continue winging it, and we'll move forward. Another piece of defining really what those buzzwords are is systems change. System interventions are changes that impact all elements of an organization, institute, or system. So systems sometimes are a business, a healthcare facility like a hospital or a clinic. Sometimes it's nonprofit agencies. Schools are definitely a system. Transportation, parks and rec programs, those are all examples of systems. When I look at the work that's happening around, I actually think that systems change is sometimes the hardest work to be done because it's not as tangible as the policy or the environmental change. Really, a systems change is how you do business. What is shifting within a business that's how you do work? Sometimes we can call it a norm change. A systems change is ideal when it has been documented and there's a process to be followed, but a lot of things start with an informal systems change and gradually become the sustainable change because somebody says, oh, wait, if I'm to leave, this isn't going to happen. And part of doing a sustainable systems change is to have the documentation and the support of administration so that when staff turns over, the work still happens. A couple of examples of systems changes could be a business that typically will say you cannot use your work computer to do internet searches or anything, but they would allow you to go onto Weight Watchers to track your nutritional points. That's part of their system because that's part of a wellness policy. So that's a systems change. Another way that we see systems changes is in hospitals. We often will and really encourage hospitals when a baby is born, instead of offering formula to feed the baby, that they automatically would move towards supporting the mother to breastfeed. Back up a couple. We're getting closer. We're on the systems change slide, the third one, Betsy.
Okay.
I'm going to pause for a second to catch up.
This right here?
Yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you. And basically, folks, what you're seeing is I did read that slide, although I'm not a fan of reading slides when you can't see them. It's important. The other piece that I think is really critical when we talk about systems change is to recognize that that's sometimes the very first step to policy change. So sometimes it's an informal way, sometimes it's staff or clinicians or even volunteers who start doing business in one way, and that it starts to swell around the environment that you're working in. And gradually, that's where that systems change happens, is people assume that that's what the policy is and then realize it isn't. And so part of our systems change is making that the sustainable piece. Another example of a systems change that I think is definitely part of that unwritten part that could lead to some solid policy change is when employers really encourage their staff and employees to take their breaks, make sure you get up from your desk, and whether that's getting physical activity or just taking a break to get away from the computer, there's all that ergonomic piece that applies. But there's also a lot of evidence that if you were truly sedentary all day, no matter how much you exercise, it's also bad for your health. So when they are consistent and really encourage employees to get up, to move, to take your lunch breaks away from your desk, to go out for a walk, to find opportunities for physical activity, and that's more in the informal way. Sometimes that happens from supervisor or manager, and sometimes it happens all the way from the top. And we've seen some of that within some of our Healthy Communities work from counties that really are promoting staff wellness to recognize if public health is going to be promoting wellness, maybe we need to get our own shop in order before we really start reaching out into the community. So that's a big piece of it. Another example of a systems change that may start with a nurse or doctor or other healthcare provider that is a real advocate for physical activity and tobacco-free living would be that they start talking with all of their patients about, are you exercising? Are you getting physical activity? Do you smoke? Do you chew? Have you thought about quitting? And sometimes it starts because somebody has a passion or has a life experience, but really we're seeing more and more where it's becoming part of what you do with every patient. Some clinics will put some sorts of notes to trigger the healthcare provider to ask about physical activity or tobacco, and it just becomes routine. Although this is not a systems change in the way we're thinking of it, I think about seatbelts. That was a true systems change in one way where for many of us when we were children, the seatbelt was your parent who would put the arm across you when they came to a stop. Where now many of us who are now adults and parents couldn't imagine getting in a car without a seatbelt. That's been part of the change. And then laws were passed so that it is a law to have seatbelts on at all times. So that was the policy, but it started more gradually. Most of our systems change starts smaller, but then can work itself into a truly a sustainable way. Next slide. Betsy, can you move it to the next slide? Okay, we'll continue that winging. So the other piece that I really wanted to start off with defining was what's an environmental change. When we talk about environmental changes, they really involve the physical or material changes to an environment. There's something that you can touch. So sometimes we look at those as sidewalks. So when new developments are created, that they have sidewalks so that the residents have the ability to safely walk from point A to point B. Bike lanes are another example of having a physical change where there are lanes with markings that will show what, where bikes are supported and really increasing the ability of bike friendliness. Another example would be trails or paths. Many communities now are taking, whether it's an old railroad track and creating a path for walking, running, biking, walking your dog. All those pieces, although some people think, oh, it's just to get outside and enjoy some nice weather, it also really increases access to physical activity so that people don't need to have a membership to a gym to be physically active. When we promote things like trails and sidewalks, it allows people access for physical activity opportunities, which can be very instrumental in increasing physical activity. Sometimes other environmental changes may be what's in a vending machine. So instead of having all sorts of junk food in a vending machine, having options in the machine that are healthier, lower fat, lower sugar, higher fiber, and that sort of thing. Another example of an environmental change may be the community gardens that are popping up all over. So whether that's publicly owned land by the city, county, or state, or sometimes it's a business that donates the location for the community garden so that it's physically located someplace. People come to expect that that garden will happen from year to year to year. It's even better when those lots or plots are then donated to the Community Garden Association, made that term up, but that they are a permanent structure, so they're both a policy change and an environmental change. Next slide, please. I've spoken to much of this, but just really want to kind of reiterate why we are focusing on policy change. What we recognize is the way we've done public health has definitely had an impact But as we continue, most of our major public health problems are not going to happen from dealing with person by person and looking at personal decision making. A lot of our efforts have been to really get the public to understand how the choices that they make as an individual will impact them holistically. But when we look at things like obesity or tobacco use or other chronic diseases, it has a much bigger role in our society. And so really focusing in on those PSE work is pretty critical. Another part to recognize is that the societal problems definitely impact health. So when I was just speaking about sidewalks, if you don't have access to sidewalks or they're there and they're all bumpy and it's difficult and maybe not even safe to be walking around because you also have loose dogs that there's the concern that they're going to get bit, those are some of the environmental pieces that if we just go to the neighbor and say, I don't feel comfortable walking on our street because I'm afraid your dog is going to attack me, that's one thing. But then if we do a systems change and a policy change that leash laws are required and enforced, that will also help to create a better environment. Really, the PSE work that we're focused on is really trying to make those sustainable changes to make the healthy choice the easy choice. Some of you have probably spent a lot of time looking at the social determinants of health, looking at place matters. And really, when we talk about policy change, we have to be conscious about the unintentional outcomes that happen. I've spent many years working in our tobacco program here at the state, and one of the things that we see around smoke-free housing is that if you just say, tomorrow we're going smoke-free, and if you smoke, you're going to be kicked out, is that really helping somebody who has a strong addiction to tobacco, especially if it's in a low-income housing area? So really trying to pay attention to the intended and unintended consequences and plan for both, that is a key piece of successfully doing PSE work. And then the last thing, and I think sometimes we think about this as a buzzword, we talk a lot about moving upstream. Instead of catching bodies at the bottom of the river, moving upstream and figuring out what's getting them to fall in. And that's really what we're trying to do around chronic disease prevention here in the department. We recognize that the costs of physical inactivity, poor nutrition, and tobacco use are leading to things including diabetes, heart disease, higher risks of stroke, higher risks of cancers. And we will continue to treat that as a society. We need to. But there are things that we can do to make really that healthy choice an easy choice. Much like when I described the seatbelts, I wouldn't think about getting in a car with somebody who doesn't have a seatbelt. Well, that's part of what we're trying to do is that when you look at your lunch choices, you think about, oh, so am I going to have my fat content for the entire week in this one meal? Or do they have options that are good for me? Is it going to help me to increase my fruits and vegetable intake? Am I going to get some of the servings that I need to? Am I able to increase my physical activity? Are there ways that I can live a life that is healthier? And some of us in our society do that, and a lot of it just don't necessarily think about that. So some of what we are trying to do with policy systems and environmental changes is really just make it easy. Human nature is sometimes we take the easier road. So part of what we're trying to do is really focus on making that healthy choice the easy choice, and not just focusing on our home, really looking at work sites. There's a large movement around employers recognizing that healthier employees are more productive. Same with schools. We definitely have seen that healthier kids learn better. They have higher success in academics. So trying to make the healthy choice the easy choice for children. Looking at healthcare so that when they go to their doctor and they say, oh, no, I never exercise, that they just don't say, okay, that's fine. It doesn't matter that you're overweight and pre-diabetic, but they really are focusing on trying to help people to make healthier choices. And as I've said many times, the goal is really to try and prevent people from being chronically ill. Next slide, please. And I can't reiterate this enough. Really, the reason that we're focusing on the policy, environmental, and systems change is the way we've been doing business sometimes is expensive. We have limited resources, including our staff time. And if we always do what we've always done, we're going to get the same results. It's hard to go home and turn on the news and not see something that's affecting the work that we all do, whether you're talking about obesity and the raising rates of obesity, or the deaths caused by cancer, or the lives that are impacted from the tobacco use. It's everywhere. So it's important, and it's time for us to figure out, with our public health system shrinking, how can we work smarter? And that's really where I think as a program, at the Healthy Communities Program, we've really tried to support some of the communities to do this work. Go ahead to the next slide. So historically, I think about when I started as a health educator in over 20 years ago. And my role really was what's listed. I did a lot of one-time events. I was taught to do counseling about health behaviors. And that whole plan part, there was a plan of what the school year would look like, but where we were going, it was a lot of education, sometimes short-term, and it wasn't sustainable. And I know I saw that when I would move from one position or another. Then you had to start all over with identifying the context. And I don't want to put that work down, because that work was so critical for us to be able to do what we're doing in 2011. But really what we've had to do is kind of change what our bag of tricks are. What is the work that we do in public health? How are we moving away from those one-time individual, not really looking at any long-term plans and knowing what we were trying to do versus just trying to increase awareness? We're really focused on that larger systematic scope of work. One thing that often pops into my mind when I think about events, and I'll speak to that in a moment, specifically about health fairs. Sometimes people really put down health fairs because they're not sustainable. They're people will come, they love our trinkets and trash, but sometimes they don't do anything with it. And when you look at a health fair, that the value of a health fair is sometimes really promoting what your agency can do. It can be a great opportunity for earned media, for getting resources out there, but it's probably not going to make a change. And we, historically, lots of us have spent many hours in health fairs. This work is harder, though. I think the policy systems and environmental change work and that relationship development that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. I think some folks who are really getting into this, like, oh, I would love to go do a health fair and chat with people. The problem is we just don't have the resources anymore. Next slide. So when we look at really what are some of the characteristics of policy systems and environmental change, it's something that's ongoing. One of the things I talk about with our team here is if somebody is to win the lottery, granted you have to buy the ticket, but somebody wins the lottery and they leave, will their work continue? Is it something that is sustainable? Or is it about really great leadership at an agency, but when that leader leaves, it all goes away, then that's not sustainable. That's definitely not a change that has happened, but it's the beginning. Those are the foundational steps and that often need to happen. And that's the piece when I talk about some of the more traditional public health, we had to do that work to be able to get to a place that we could have these conversations. Policy level also includes building relationships with people that maybe you haven't worked with before, that they were those people or those elected officials or someone that maybe you knew through your personal life but never interacted in the public health realm. Our work and the way we do our work is shifting. Another part of the PSC work, because it takes a long time, is you do need to plan. Here's where I'm going. Here's what I'd like to see. We'd like to see a tobacco-free parks, not to eliminate or reduce secondhand smoke exposure, but to change the social norms around most people don't use tobacco. So part of it is here's where we're trying to go, and then you have the incremental steps around how you're going to get there. And the best part, and I really feel like some of the most exciting work of our policy systems and environmental change is it's long-term. It's for our children and grandchildren in the future, residents of our state. We're making a difference. And that's where I feel like we have a lot of value and a lot of room to see that we make a difference in our world. I probably sound like a bleeding heart liberal when I say that, but I realized I went into public health because I wanted to make a difference in my state. And this is one way that we get to do that. I don't think I'm alone in the field, and that's kind of the idealistic way that you start out in your early 20s. But when you really do get to do the work, it's pretty neat to see it really impacting lives. Go ahead to the next slide. So the other piece that I want to talk about is just kind of giving you some specific examples of how you could take some historical work that you've done, or that is really something that happens all the time in your agency, and how you can help to support some PSE change. First example would be celebrating a National Nutrition Month. There are lots of different opportunities for national events. I think every month there is something that could be organized. And instead of doing a big program for the National Nutrition Month, what you could be doing is working with your local school district to add a salad bar, or having fruits like apples at the register every single day. So not just salad bar Mondays, but that it is part of the offerings that students have for their lunches. Another value of doing a salad bar is that oftentimes many schools really help support students to get their nutritional needs met through the free and reduced lunch programs. If they have access to healthier foods, it really can help to increase their getting the different fruits and vegetables. Sorry for stumbling there. Another thing that we still see, and it can definitely be helpful, are the family fun runs or the walks or runs. It does definitely increase physical activity. So for that day, that's a great thing. But the piece is when that fun run is done, are people going to continue to access the tracks or take that walking route? So what we're looking for is something that will be more sustainable. One of the things that we're starting to see happen more and more are what we call joint use agreements. So maybe a school district has typically locked up the track field. There's a lock on the gate, and what they do is they work with the school district to open up the track so that people can do their physical activity around the track. Or maybe there's a great weight room in the school, and so opening that up to the public outside of school hours so that people have access to weights or swimming pools, or sometimes even just a basketball court, instead of saying you can't use outside of school areas or school times, that they really do have access at all times and are encouraged, so that the school is a welcoming place for physical activity. We sometimes see people do a walk to school day. That's a great example of some foundational work that has to happen. That's been a key piece to establishing what is the policy change, which is a safe routes to school. Students will walk from home when maybe they typically don't, but they have to cross roads with poor visibility, the sidewalks aren't safe, there's glass all over, and they discover that through the event of a walk to school day, but the process and the policy that happens are really safe routes to schools and looking at and promoting the safe routes to schools. In the tobacco world, there's different events such as Kick Butts Day, so that there may be a great PR event that will talk about the harms that happens from tobacco or how many people die. It's a great earned media piece, but once the day is done, then the day is done. But what will last and where the policy change could be is really working with school boards to strengthen their tobacco policy and enforce their tobacco policy that tobacco use is not allowed on school grounds at all, 24/7, not just 8 to 3 when students are there. And then the last example that I have for you are screenings for staff. Instead of coming in and doing a blood sugar check and a blood pressure, which can be a step to get them going the right direction. A good example of a policy change, especially for the school, would be to start the School Health Advisory Council that can look at how do we make the sustainable change for both our staff and employees, but that will then trickle down to the students as well. So those are some higher level pieces around policy systems and environmental change. But one of the things that I think is really important is to really talk about what's real. And so when I was asked to do this presentation, really wanted to partner with one of our local communities who has agreed to kind of go on this journey with the Department of Health of doing the policy systems and environmental change around the prime risk factors for chronic disease. And so that is how we have Lita Travis, who will share. I think Danny's going to do a formal introduction, and then we'll get some time for questions.
Thank you, Carla. From my perspective, a really great overview of policy systems and environmental change work in public health today. So as Carla said, we're now going to hear from Lita Travis, who is the Garfield County Health District Administrator. And Lita is a member of their Healthy Communities Leadership team in their county. So with that, let's transfer to Lita.
Thank you. We've been with the Healthy Communities for a little bit over 2 years now. They had a pilot project started, again, 2 years ago, and I believe it began with 5 counties. We weren't really sure if we wanted to do it or not to start with because it just sounded so foreign to what we had been doing, you know, for our everyday business, but we did. The first year of this pilot project was really different from what we normally do because, like Carla was saying about doing events and activities, that's how we did business. The first year of the pilot project, we weren't doing activities, but we were doing training, teaching us how to go ahead and make the shift from what we were doing to where we were supposed to be going. And that first year came with a lot of challenges for us. It wasn't easy. We had an office of 3.7 full-time employees, and we were required to have a 3-man team. That made it really difficult to start with because there's a lot of other things to be doing in public health, you know, besides starting up a new program. We worked around that and we're pretty successful with it because we were sending 2 of 3 people to each training and coming back and updating the rest of the staff. Along that year, we had to basically, again, change our perception on how we were doing business. It took probably through the 3rd training for us to kind of get it. And so a lot of times the staff felt like they were at loose ends. We had a lot of internal resistance to it because, again, they were at loose ends. People did start progressing within the office, but they didn't all progress at the same time. That was kind of hard because, you know, you'd think you were at the point where everybody gets it and, you know, let's move. Let's go ahead and learn a little bit more and get started on this. And then you'd look back and there's maybe 1 or 2 back, they're still not getting it. But it did. It took probably an entire year of the training from them. The staff was on board. And while we were trying to get the staff comfortable with this, we had our partners in the community who were really confused because at this point, you know, we weren't out going to their, well, we might be going to their events and activities, but we couldn't participate in the same way. We couldn't bring money to them like we did in the past because the money wasn't in our statement of work. We had to offer something different. And some of the partners were really unhappy with us because they wanted it to all go back the way it was. I think that that was the worst for us. But after the training was over, and as we got into the 2nd year when we were starting to show results, the partners started looking at us like we were worthy again and that we did have something to offer them, only it was a little bit different. And I think that at this point, what we offer is stronger than what we had before because we can offer, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in this presentation, but our offers to them are stronger than what they were before. What I liked about starting through the Healthy Communities was the fact that with a small staff and trying to do these activities, it was a huge effort for the office because, you know, it takes a lot of prep for a small office to put together something like Red Ribbon Week or, you know, some presentation for the school or something like that. And then you turn around next year and you had to do it all over. So it was like starting from the ground up every time we did anything. Definitely not sustainable. And sustainability was the word that we learned all throughout the training in the first year. And after I finally figured out what sustainability meant and what it could do for us, I kind of became really pleased with that term because we can now look back into our work on what we're doing, and the question comes up often, okay, we can do this, but is it sustainable? And we have a tendency to shift more towards sustainable practice versus non-sustainable activities. It makes it easier for the office to run. And the sustainability is something that within the community, after we go through the process of creating something long-standing, it's there forever, or at least long-term, as long as the public wants it. One of my definitions of event versus sustainability was a bicycle rodeo. We spent years doing bicycle rodeos every year at the end of the school year. We would go out and we'd fit helmets and give helmets. We'd do safety tips and give the kids popsicles and then turn them loose for the summer. And there's probably a larger percentage of the kids, you know, not using the helmets and doing whatever they wanted on their bicycles, riding down the middle of the street and that sort of thing. One-time education did not seem to work. Now, through a grant, the school is going to adopt a new bicycle curriculum in the PE classes this next year. And that is through one of the grants that we were able to assist them with. We're pretty excited about that. One of the other things I liked is the fact that when we were basically doing the tobacco program instead of Healthy Communities, we were part of the Community Health and Prevention Advisory Board, CHPAB, which is a local group. And basically at that point in time, our membership consisted of health department, human services, mental health, law enforcement, and, you know, other partners that were kind of in those fields. Now that we are doing Healthy Communities, the CHPAB board has just basically embraced what we're doing, and the membership has opened up. We now have like the school wellness committee, we have the prosecuting attorney, we have members from the city council on it, you know, areas that we wouldn't have been able to show interest when we had the previous board. And the people in CHPAB are looking at us like, you know, like we're really good partners, and in general in the community, they kind of have a different expectation of us. And one of the reasons because of that is we were fortunate enough a few years ago to go ahead and improve our assessment. We now have an assessment coordinator who is also part of our three-man team, who has been able to really hone her skills, you know, with the work we're doing right now, which means that we can provide data and we can help, you know, find the tools that they need, because when you're in a county of less than 2,300 people, you're not going to find a lot of people that are able to access the data successfully and understand what it means and find the appropriate data. So that is a huge thing for the grants that we have helped people go after, and I do believe it's really appreciated. So at the end of year one, after all these trainings, we were supposed to create an action plan. And this action plan we created, we had 3 areas that we wanted to work on. One was safe routes to school. The second one was to develop a relationship with the brand new community garden. And the third one was to investigate potential partners. Also during that time, because, year one, because we were still somewhat confused, we did a lot of presentations like the CHPAP board and, different little groups, as well as our Board of Health. We wanted to make sure that everybody was on board with this. And of course, they were still kind of confused. But we all went through this together until we learned, what we needed to know to be successful. So when year 2 came along, we had our action plan, and we started to act. We already knew that the assessment was going to be helpful, and it did open doors for us. And our Healthy Community Coordinator, who was also the assessment coordinator, was actively looking for grants, not just for us, but for other agencies, needs for the community, because this Healthy Communities helped us go outside of our office and, just go into areas that we had not been in before. And that has been really good because we have helped different groups with community things that have been successful. So basically what we do in our everyday work on the site is we kind of look around the county to see if there's areas that might be improved. And then we go back to the safety of our CHPAB board and, bring some of these things up, to see what the other members might think about it. The very latest one was at the meeting this morning for the CHPAB board. We had attended National Night Out last night, and it was a smoke-free event. There's no city ordinance saying that the city park is smoke-free, but, since it's through the law enforcement, they can go ahead and declare it smoke-free, which they did, and they did publicly. And, we came across a smoker 2 or 3 that, went ahead and complied with it. But we went back to CHPAB and we said, what about if we talked about sending a letter to the City Council and asking them if we can have an ordinance or something that would make this park smoke-free during community events. Well, 2 things are great. The law enforcement immediately said, yes, that would be a good idea. I'm behind it. And one of the city council members was sitting on the board, and he was shaking his head yes. He was also at the event last night. And so it's going to be a lot more beneficial for us, instead of just going to the city council and asking ourselves, to have a wide variety of people within a local group go ahead and approach them. And that's kind of a real victory right there, to get the support of a group for an issue. Anyway, some of the highlights that we had in year 2 is grants. We, as a group with CHPAB, wrote a grant for Safe Routes to School. It was a Washington State Department of Transportation Safe Walking and Bike Route grant. It was for $240,000, which includes in-kind financing too, and it was for crosswalks, sidewalks, for the routes going to school within a mile of the school, which is real significant for our situation because that encompasses most of the town. We didn't get the grant, but they suggested that we apply for a second grant, which was a bike and pedestrian safety grant through OSPI. And the reasoning from DOT was that, as you go ahead and apply for these grants, every time you successfully get one, they look a little bit more seriously next time, So we went ahead after the grant. This one was actually headed by the school. It was for $25,000, and they did get it. And it provides bikes, bike trailer helmets, training, and it's for grades 5th through 8th. And so they got the grant, and they're going to put it in their PE curriculum, and that's going to be an ongoing thing. And that's kind of a relief for me because remember the bike rodeos? I can remember 2 instances in the summer after we had done our bike rodeos that kids were hauled off in ambulances because they weren't wearing helmets and they were hit in the street. This way, if they're doing it in a PE curriculum, they're going to have more than like 2 or 3 hours, and they're going to get graded on it. And so, you know, I feel like this is a very good place to start. When the bike grant came through, another grant showed up from the Washington State Traffic Safety Control, and it was for flashing light beacons at crosswalks, and the school jumped on it. And it kind of surprised me. It kind of pleased me because, you know, they'd already received a grant, and they said, you know, we need to go after this grant for the Main Street, and then a second grant for down around the school because, you know, eventually we would like to have the big grant, and we still need these things, and so we're going for it. And so they did, and they received one of the grants, the one for Main Street, and so we were all very happy about that. And the superintendent had told me, he says, you know, irregardless of whether we receive these grants or not, we're going to start putting this in our plan, in our budget throughout the year. He says, and we can't do it all, but we will start working on this, on the safe routes to school. And I thought that this was pretty spectacular because these grants have been taken care of by a very small school district, applied for, and 2 of the 3 applications were okayed within less than a year's time. That's pretty big for our community. So that was the first one, the Safe Routes to School. Our second action plan was to develop the relationship with the new community garden. Well, community gardens are in the state of Washington, and I was kind of surprised to see a group in our small county decide to head up a community garden. And it came about the time we had to do this action plan, and I truly believe that, you know, timing is everything. And so we sat back and watched for a while because, you know, they kind of needed to decide what they wanted to do and develop their group and develop their own foundation, which they did. And when they started putting the beds in, we went to them and, you know, introduced the Healthy Communities Grant and, you know, made it real clear that we were kind of interested in being a side partner. And, you know, this is the sort of stuff that we can offer. You know, if you're choosing to go after grants, we can help you find some. If you need information, we can help provide some. And so that seemed to work out pretty good. They continued on with their community garden. We started promoting it through our newsletter and our local newspaper when it was appropriate. The first year they had planted the community garden. We used their garden as a halfway mark through our Susan G. Komen walk, and they were able to show people through their community garden, hand out flyers that they had made, and hand out water to the participants. That worked out really well, and this year they asked to come back and be part of the walk. During that time, to help promote the community garden, we funded a small kiosk for them, which provides like a suggestion box, education, contact numbers, which has been used quite a bit, you know, so they're very pleased with that. We had given them temporary signage for the Susan G. Komen walk. It was laminated. And they went ahead and made, you know, a little board with a, you know, a board on sticks. I'm not sure what they made. But anyway, they went ahead and they stapled this to the board. A year later for the Susan G. Komen walk, when I was down there, I thought, good heavens, they still had the same laminated sign up on the board, and that was their identification for the garden. So we checked with Healthy Communities, and we were able to purchase permanent signage for them. Very simple signage, except that, you know, they were pretty grateful about that. We found out that they had received a greenhouse grant, and from the time they received the grant to when they were able to go over and purchase it, it was $500 short. We were able to help fill that gap for them. Greenhouse is really important because our growing season over here has been real iffy the last few years, and you know, we don't have the longest growing season either, and so this is going to help them immensely, you know, with their garden for extending it. We're trying to hook them up with the school so that they can have student interaction. The school is very receptive to that. They just haven't figured out the logistics on that. The garden provides fresh food. It does not provide food for like individual people at this point. And so the beds that they are establishing for Garfield County, the food is going to the senior center, for their meal program, going to the local food bank, and then the licensed daycare. And the licensed daycare kids come down and actually work in the garden when it's active. And then on the side, they provide Halloween pumpkins for kids. They take special requests. For instance, the food bank this year asked if they could put in a potato patch because they do not receive very many potatoes. So they're being very accommodating with their partners. They requested signage to make it smoke-free, which, you know, came out of the blue because we didn't mention that, but they came to us and requested smoke-free signage. During the summer, one of my county commissioners at our Board of Health meeting asked me if the community garden might be interested in growing flowers on the side because he felt that it would be nice to have a nicer floral display at the county fair because people have not been entering as much in the last couple years. So I approached the garden and asked him about that. They had a board meeting and agreed so that the commissioner would be able to get his floral display at the fair, and in exchange, they're going to be able to promote themselves more at the fair. So the community garden is a work in progress, but it's really coming along. And we feel good being side partners with this because we're able to, you know, kind of boost their efforts in what they're doing. And then the third area was, in our action plan, was to investigate potential partners. Well, we started with CHPAB, the Community Health and Prevention Advisory Board, and their focus actually shifted quite quickly from just alcohol, smoking, and drugs to include the healthy lifestyles. CHPAB is actually doing more policy work now. The other thing that they did within the last year was they sent the City Council a letter requesting them to lower the speed limits in not the actual school zone close to the school, but in areas of high traffic during school, outside of the actual school zones. And that's a work in progress right now. They have invited new members to attend the group, so the group is getting to be very broad-focused, which is kind of a nice thing because it is making a stronger group. They visited the bylaws. They were just changed and adopted to address the shift in the priorities from the CHPAB board. Currently, they are working with DOH to develop a logo. And the expectation is that we should be seeing that by the beginning of September so that we can use it at our fair. And they're really looking at community issues now instead of, you know, just preparing for the next event. Previously, when it was tobacco, drugs, and alcohol, you could go to CHPAB and discuss Red Ribbon Week. Now they're outside looking at, you know, just the bigger picture. They're still doing Red Ribbon Week, you know, the mental health is, except that, you know, it's just not limited to that. So those were the three areas we worked on our action plan for year one. We are just continuing down that route. I feel very good, you know, with this, you know, change to more sustainable things because, like Carla said, the budget's really getting tight. And you know, you notice it in your individual programs that you work in. And it's kind of nice to be able to do something that is going to be truly usable. Better streets and sidewalks, better signage is something that is really, really hard for a small community to budget for or to acquire, you know, as like one agency. And so I really think that we're going the right direction on this. And Carla, do you have anything else to add?
No, thanks, Lita. As you were talking, you remind me consistently of the smaller communities sometimes haven't done this work, and you're a great example of how taking on a new approach can work in whatever size community.
Thank you.
So with that, we are open to questions from any of the listeners. And Betsy, do they type in questions, or
Yes,
what's
people
the
do
best?
type in questions. We have one at this point, and then about funding and just what with the, of course, the financial resources being limited these days, what are the sources of funding for some of these projects? Are they foundation grants, federal government grants? If one of you could speak to that, that would be great.
I'll speak to that one. The work that happened in Garfield County, as well as we have 12 sites right now that we're working on doing an integrated approach to healthy communities. Here at the department, we have different funding sources, primarily from the Centers for Disease Control. And what we have done is pooled, I think I have 7 different funding streams to then work with the communities on whether it was capacity building, which was what Lita described as the first year, and they received $50,000 from a variety of programs. We combined our funding to get to that amount. And then in the second year, they were receiving $75,000, again from a variety of funding sources, including tobacco prevention and control. First it was state funds. Now they are using their federal CDC funds. We have heart disease and stroke dollars, diabetes prevention and control, comprehensive cancer, colorectal cancer, skin cancer, preventative public health block grants, and physical activity and nutrition program. And we also have a very small amount from CDC to do healthy communities work as well. So what is a little bit of a nightmare here at the state trying to figure out what dollars are going where, but what we really wanted to do is to get the dollars to support this work out at least in what we can. So we pooled our funding here, have worked with our project officers at CDC to say, here's how we're leveraging our dollars to expand it. We've had about $1 million total going into that, and then we have a big piece around training that many of you may have even participated in. We brought in some national speakers. We definitely are seeing a shrinking budget because of some federal cuts. So our future we're still trying to determine, but it's primarily dollars that go from the feds to the states.
How many years do they last?
Betsy, do you have more questions?
There was a follow-up to that, which was, are those grants multi-year grants, or in how many years do they tend to last?
Depends. Most of them are multi-year, but they're reauthorized each year. And some, like this year, we're experiencing shrinking significantly. So I will stick with my depends answer.
Betsy, do you have more questions?
We don't have more questions right now. I was just going to say, if anyone has questions, please do type them in, and we will pose them to our presenters.
Betsy, there is a question from one of the other panelists.
Okay, great.
Should I share that question?
Yeah, you can certainly pose that question.
Okay. The question is, what do you think are the main obstacles for local public health staff doing the policy systems and environmental change work? Lita, can you take that one?
The challenges.
Your main obstacles.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think that it is.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
To be able to go outside your office, you need to have, a group that is going to work with you. It's not all about public health.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events.
And I think it's that policy work takes time. And for some, you could see where to happen. So this is really where some of it's figuring it out as we go along, and that's where I know I'm really appreciative of the counties that have gone on this journey with us, especially our first 5. So in addition to Garfield, we worked with Asotin, Grace Harbor, Pacific, and Adams. And that first year of trying to get this policy system and environmental change work, it was rocky on all of us. And so the partnership that happened between the local and the state has been invaluable as well. Any other questions out there?
Yes, we do have another question. This question is, what are the requirements of becoming a healthy community with support from DOH and CDC? What needs to be in place to be a candidate? When is the next program application cycle?
I was wondering if I was going to get that question. The way that we have identified the communities that we currently work with has been really based on data. It's looked at who has high rates of chronic disease, has poverty, has lower rates of graduation. So really looking at the data. So and sometimes, as you know, Lita talked about what happened in Garfield County, they have the smallest population in the state, and they were one of the counties that we looked at. So we didn't necessarily go for who's ready to do it. It's who has the need to approach work. And so when the second part of that question of requirements from CDC, really CDC is not requiring this. What we have done here at the department is do some prioritization, recognizing TSC work is critical, but not everybody has been trained to do this, and that's where we have really focused on both our 12 sites, the 12 sites, but then we also have offered training regionally to include everyone, so that regardless of whether we had funding or not for you to dedicate time, that there was the ability to get the training on how to do this policy systems and environmental change work. Currently, we're really evaluating what our next steps are. We've lost about half of our budget, or we foresee that happening due to the block grant dollars being eliminated out of the federal budget. So we're in a place of really trying to figure out what the next steps are. So I don't have an answer on how do you become the next healthy community sites, because we're really still trying to figure out what that's going to look like. Any other questions?
That is it for now.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then I'd like to say a special thank you to both Lita and Carla for being willing to tell the story. Carla to kind of lay out the groundwork and the philosophy and the thinking and the theory. And then also to Lita for telling the local story, which I think is where it's really fun to listen to what's happening at the local level, and knowing that that's where the rubber hits the road, that's where the action happens. And it's so exciting and fun to hear that there are good things happening in a small rural county. Because oftentimes we hear about other locations, but we don't always hear about the successes of places like Garfield County. So thank you, Lita. Thank you, Carla. And with that, we're ready to sign off, Betsy.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. We will be having another webinar in September, and details about that will be sent out in the next couple of weeks.